Councilman Trollinger.
Present.
Councilwoman Bryant Ward.
Present.
Oh, she ceased.
Councilman Jenkins. I know you're there, Dave.
I'm here. Thank you, Madam
I
Mayor.
do know that
Present.
Councilman Jenkins is here and Mayor Jenkins. Okay. And also, before we do the Pledge of Allegiance, just a reminder for our council, if you are able to identify yourself before speaking, that would be most helpful for those that are unfamiliar with who you are or the sound of your voice, and it keeps us all on the same page. So with that said, would you all please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. I feel a little crooked here. There we go. Happy. I just wanted to get a couple of administrative items out of the way before we begin our first meeting of 2022. So first of all, you may have noticed that we have updated our agenda, just tweaked it a little bit. This is to reflect the agenda in our chapter 13 of our code. Secondly, as the good old saying goes, no good deed goes unpunished. Our great staff extended a courtesy of calling some applicants and residents into the recently brought to our attention that this act of kindness was actually at the expense of our town. So what we did is we contacted our attorney to offer us guidance on how to proceed. He stated that the Open Meeting Act, Section 3-303A, requires that a government make a reasonable effort to allow citizens the opportunity to view the government's legislative activities. There's no participation requirement in that statute. Accordingly, La Plata, like most towns, has switched to a virtual meeting setting whereby a video of the meeting can be viewed online, both live and later at the convenience of the citizen. Such practice look at accommodations that are not otherwise required under statutes such as ADA, etc. To do so for a limited number of citizens appears to offer favoritism or special treatment at the expense of the taxpayers. Further, the town would not be in a position to offer such service to all of its residents. Thus, it could be deemed discriminatory in practice. That is from our attorney. So moving forward, I just greatly appreciate everyone who attends, participates, activities. So thank you for that. And that will bring us to the first item on our 2022 agenda, ARPA Community Forum. Mr. Manuel, that may be you.
Yes, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Town Council. Brettmanuel, Town Manager. We have with us tonight Thomas Himmler, who's with Thomas and Michael LLC. The PowerPoint presentation was included within the agenda, and I guess the agenda item for tonight is the ARPA Community Forum. So I will let Mr. Himmler walk through his presentation, and at the end we will probably open the floor to receive public input.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you, Mr. Manuel, and good evening, Mayor and Town Council. It's good to see you again. So let's just jump in. We're going to be very brief, but it's always good when we're talking about ARPA funds to just have a brief overview so that the community can understand a little bit more about it. So with that, we'll get started. If you can go to the next slide, please. And so what we're going to talk about just briefly is what is the American Rescue Plan Act? How does the act benefit the town of La Plata, and what can the funds be spent on? Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So the American Rescue Plan Act, a lot of us have heard about it, heard it on the news. But in essence, what it was a $1.9 trillion economic stimulus package that funded a variety of programs and services across the United States. The goal was to help provide payments to individuals and families. A lot of us received our economic stimulus, aid from the federal government as individuals. They also provided a lot of funding to states and local governments, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. It also had money for infrastructure, assistance to small businesses, homeowners, renters, and of course, dealing with COVID-19, a lot of money for vaccination, contact tracing, and testing, as we're all aware of, especially now. Under ARPA, $350 billion was set aside for states, local governments, territories, and tribal governments. Next slide, please. One more slide, please. So how does this benefit the town? So the town is scheduled to receive $9.5 million in federal funds from this. And the goal of this money is to help the town respond to the public health emergency or its negative economic impact, and then make investments in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. Next slide, please. So what can the funds be spent on? Next slide, there you go. Basically, there's four main categories. One is to respond to the public health emergency or its negative economic impacts. Second one is to essentially respond to help workers who were performing essential work during the pandemic by providing premium pay, which is on top of their normal pay, for eligible workers in particular. The third one was to general provision of government services. And this is when local governments and state governments experience a reduction in revenue due to the pandemic. And we'll talk a little bit about this later, because as of last week they came out, Treasury did, US Treasury, and made a rather large change in this category. And then lastly, to make necessary investments in water, sewer, or broadband. And the key thing to remember with this is the funds in general had to be spent from March 3rd, 2021 onward, except for premium pay, which could go backwards. Next slide, please. So these are just, the next few slides are just a few examples, like under public health, what could be eligible theoretically. COVID-19 vaccination testing, contact tracing, buying PPE equipment, for example, capital investments in facilities to respond to public health. It could be building a medical clinic, those kind of things, covering payroll for public health and safety and public sector staff, substance abuse or substance use services, and mental health. And a lot of jurisdictions are spending money on mental health because COVID has had a very significant impact on communities across the United States. Next slide, please. And then negative economic impacts is what you think. It's basically helping household deal with challenges and maybe providing food for their family, making rent, mortgage payments, utilities, and also providing cash transfers like stimulus type payments that, like I mentioned earlier, that we received, that a lot of us have received. It could also involve small business assistance because a lot of businesses were impacted. It also could be rehiring public sector staff up to and beyond pre-pandemic levels. So those are just a few examples on a negative economic impact. Next slide, please. Services to disproportionately impacted communities. These were ones that were really targeted towards particular communities, in particular low income communities. And you see the list here of education, early childhood learning, academic services. You also see assistance where you can run programs for childcare, home visitation services. You could also do affordable housing in these communities. So there's several different examples. Next slide, please. Premium pay, as we talked about, this could either go to the public sector employees or to grants to other employers. But the key is they have to be essential workers who perform in-person work, interact with others at work, or physically handle items by other individuals. Next slide. And then infrastructure. Again, it's clean water like wastewater treatment, stormwater, water conservation. It could also be drinking water with dealing with transportation, transmission and distribution, lead remediation, and then lastly, broadband, in particular with a focus on last mile connectivity. Next slide, please. And then this is the revenue replacement one, where basically governments can if they were experiencing a loss, the way U.S. Treasury defines it, you could use these funds to essentially think of it this way. It's basically things that the town of La Plata already does as a government. If you had a revenue loss, you could do these different types of things. You can invest money in your infrastructure. You could build new roads. You can modernize cybersecurity. Pretty much anything that you do now, that you could do these things if you had a revenue loss. And this is one that Treasury just came out last Thursday with their final rule or regulations that guide all these funds, and basically said that, and this was meant to help cities and smaller cities and towns across the United States, was you could still do this formula that Treasury set up, or you could take essentially a standard deduction of $10 million or up to $10 million. So in the case of the town of La Plata, theoretically, you could take the whole $9.5 million that you're entitled to and use it under the revenue replacement, revenue loss component, and fund a variety of government services that you currently do. And Kevin and I talked a little bit about that earlier in the day, and we'll continue to talk about what's all involved in that. But it is a lot of flexibility for cities and towns in particular. Next slide. And then lastly, just administrative costs in general, from hiring program managers or consultants, hiring people to do data analysis. Those are the type of things that you're eligible to do under ARPA. So that just quickly gives you a framework of the residents and businesses, how you can use these funds. So hopefully the residents will find this helpful, and I know the town has set up a link on our website for additional information as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I do have a question, and then I'm going to open it up to council for questions, and then open it up to anybody that is here that has questions as well. You mentioned, and I got this from other mayors within Maryland, about you don't have to calculate the revenue loss. You can take the standard $10 million deduction, standard allowance of $10 million, and put it into a general service fund. They had indicated, several mayors had indicated, it can be pretty much spent any way we want to on that part. I see from this presentation that it still has specific parameters. Can you give me a little bit more insight on how, if it is going into a general fund, a general service fund, do we still have to follow, strict rules with that, or do we have a little bit more leeway?
Oh, there's a lot more leeway in that slide. On that slide in particular, those were just examples of what could be done. But pretty much the way Treasury has provided direction in their final rule was basically it's things that you typically do. So you could spend this money on, whether it be stormwater or police cars, anything that you typically do, you could use these ARPA funds to do. So it's very flexible. And in particular, it's flexible on the reporting side. And that's one of the main reasons why Treasury did it, because a lot of smaller governments don't have the resources of a state or a large city or county to deal with all the reporting requirements that's really involved in using these funds under the eligible categories. But under this category, it's far more flexible. So it's pretty much anything that you kind of do now. Just think of it that way. You can use these funds to do those type of services. So if there's something that you haven't had the money to do, for example, to maybe renovate a building or do something like that, you can use these funds to do it, because that's under the typical type services and programs that you currently run.
Those are the words that I needed to hear. Thank you. Good words. All right, I'm going to open it up to a council, and then I'm going to open it up to any of our residents that are here that would have any questions on the ARPA Community Forum. Do I have any council members that may have questions? Oh, thank goodness, Dave, you are really kidding me. I'm a little nervous here. New year, I thought, woo! All right, Councilman Jenkins, go ahead.
Thank you again, Madam Mayor. Again, this is Councilmember Jenkins. I appreciate the presentation, and it's a brief and a good summary. I guess follow up from a question from the mayor about the capital project or something to that effect. Do they have to be linked to current plans or policies that we have in place? For instance, a comp plan or Parks and Recreation or something to that effect?
Not under the provision of government services, and Treasury didn't really opine on it. It had to be linked to a specific plan. It's really pretty general with what they're allowing state and local governments to spend under the provision of government services. So you don't have to have a plan already laid out to go do something. It could be something brand new, but it's, again, it's things that you typically would do, right? So just think of it in that context. So, but no, there's not that much restrictions on this at all, other than the traditional, you have to, procure these things in accordance with federal guidelines and those kind of things that you typically would have in receiving federal funds. And then also too, there's the overall restrictions that exist, that have always existed, that you can't just drop it to reserves. You can't spend it on pension payments, those type of things. And then Treasury did add one that basically prohibited governments from doing anything that would kind of encourage people to not follow CDC guidelines in mitigating and dealing with the pandemic. So they did try to kind of restrict it in that sense. So you couldn't give money to a business, for example, and say to the business, as a condition of receiving this money, you can't require a mask in your facility, for example. They're prohibiting those type of activities.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilman Goldsmith.
Yeah, the government can give and the government can take away. This was a great change, which sounds very nice, makes it easier for Kevin and whatnot. Can they come back and change that later on?
Well, the way this is their final rule. So the way it works is they once they have approved the final rule, it's the law of the land and the requirements for the program. Now, I should say the final rule comes out, it's effective April 1st, 2022, but what they're doing is they're allowing governments to implement it earlier if they so choose, and they're protected, from that if they choose to follow this guideline. But this is it. I mean, they're going to come back and add some clarity, I'm sure, through frequently asked questions, but in essence, this final rule is the playbook for the rest of the duration of this program.
I'm sure Kevin is grateful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilwoman Bryant Ward.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councilwoman Bryant Ward, if we're looking at doing a class and comp study for our staffing, and we know that many of our staff are under paid, if we wanted to do a market adjustment to bring them in line with the current rates, could we use the ARPA funding for that?
Under the revenue loss provision, yes, and I'm sure I'm hearing Kevin's voice and Mr. Manuel's voice in my ear, that as you do that, just make sure you can afford it once these funds go away. So
Absolutely.
But yes, that's part of, compensating, what you would typically do in government, and those are eligible items.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Mr. Manuel.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor, Town Council, Brettmanuel, Town Manager. I just wanted to let everyone know Kevin is not on the call tonight. He was unable to attend. But I'd say in Kevin's defense, we're trying to hit a moving target now that the final order is out. Hopefully we know the rules that we will be engaged with. So he and I will have an opportunity to discuss that, of course, with Mr. Himmler as far, and just to bring you up to speed, sort of moving forward after tonight's community forum. We will have a deadline for department heads to get requests in. I believe that's this Friday, and then Kevin and I will meet following that, and it will be back to Town Council with a proposal in a form of a proposal somewhere around the beginning of February. So that's from our ARPA calendar. So health being what it is, we hope that we'll be able to meet those deadlines. But if you have any further questions, of course, please feel free to ask.
This is Mayor James. Mr. Manuel, would it help, and I don't know, I know that the deadline is Friday, that I know that Councilwoman Bryant Ward had a great questions, and so did the other council members, but would it help for us to send email saying we would like to see, or do we wait until it comes to us and say we would like to see? What is a better way to get our wishes in there?
Well, I think the sooner the better. So, if you do have ideas that we can sort of have that information to consider as we look at the overall picture, because, I don't think it would be worthwhile for us to formulate a plan without council's input and then sort of expect you guys just to accept what we're providing. We do work in the best interest of the residents, and we'd like to think we have an idea of what's going on. But at the same time, you're the elected officials, and we want your input throughout the process. And at the same time, we're still trying to unwind with this revenue, how's it termed, revenue replacement may impact anything we do. So that was, I don't want to say it was a curveball, because it expanded sort of maybe the authority that we have, or the, I guess, options we may have. But at this time, we want to, make sure we put forward a plan that's something the council will be comfortable with.
Thank you for that. Council, any other comments, questions from council before I open the floor up to our great residents? Okay, is there any resident that would like to speak this evening? If so, would you please state your name and your address and whether you live in the incorporated town limits? Do I have anyone who would like to speak this evening? Okay, hearing none, we will move forward. Thank you so much, Mr. Hemler, for a fantastic presentation and for that fantastic $10 million clarification. That is good. Council, I charge you with coming up with what you would like to see on behalf of our residents to make our town even better. So if you can get that to Mr. Manuel by the close of business on Friday, it doesn't have to be a pro forma, a whatever else that Councilwoman Bryant Ward uses those big words and confuses the heck out of me. If we can just get something so we have something that, and a cost, an estimated cost, instead of saying that, whatever it would be. So that's what I challenge you all with. So thank you so much. I appreciate that.
All right, thank you, Mayor and Council.
Moving on to our next item is 2.2, schedule of fees.
Yes, Madam Mayor, Town Council, Brettmanuel, Town Manager. Just want to give you guys an update as to this process. Schedule of fees is specifically the special event permit fee, which our schedule of fees will be amended to include a fee structure for the special event permit fee, and then there will be the amendment to the major facility fees, which was a sort of a misprint from the original document that was adopted by council. So the legislation will be the same. The only thing that will change will be the actual attachment, which is the schedule of fees. And we anticipate having that to you for introduction next week, with the following week for you to take under consideration of adoption. So that's the update on that.
Thank you very much. And that'll bring us down to 2.3 FY22 Bikeway Grant Agreement.
Yes, Madam Mayor and Town Council, it was included in the agenda packet, and see, Madam Clerk has brought it up on your screen. This was the grant agreement, just to give you a sort of little background and sort of contextualize everything. The town entered into a professional services agreement with Mead and Hunt to perform a task, which was to get us the money, and that was for $60,000 for engineering. And I believe that got us to a 30% plan stage to then also apply towards the funds for the Department of Transportation grant, which the town was awarded in the amount, if you scroll down, it was from the amount of $328,000, with the town having, I believe it was an $82,000 match. So as part of this, the engineer has gone back and, as I said, contextualize everything. The engineer has gone back and sort of revised some of their costs. And I have those, you'll bear with me. it appears those will be a little greater than anticipated. Just trying to get you a final number, excuse me. The total cost being $432,000, which is with the 80% that the grant covers and the 20% that the town is covering, which like I say is about 82,000. It will be, I believe it was $23,000 over what we had initially anticipated. $22,000 of that is contingency, so it's monies we may not have to use if everything comes in on cost. But I just want to make you aware that as you consider authorizing me to sign off on this grant agreement, that our costs may be on the back end a little bit higher when we engage with a professional services agreement with Mead and Hunt to sort of walk us through the remainder of the process in getting full engineered drawings completed. So I wanted to make you aware of that, and we're available for any questions. And this was for Radio Station Road, as you're may be aware. I'm not sure if there's a description within the agreement, but I have a description which will connect basically Rosewick Road all the way to Route 6 and then turn towards town to provide sort of a path, if you will, for bike, I guess pedestrian and ped traffic. So I will shut it down and be available for any questions you may have regarding this.
Thank you, Mr. Manuel. This is Mayor James. Do we need to, do you need a consensus this evening before, I mean, I'd like to hear from everyone, obviously, but do you need a consensus this evening to engage in this grant program, knowing that it might exceed the limit that we have already approved?
Yeah, I think the consensus would be great. I think that it will come back to you as a professional services agreement, will be a separate consideration of the council with Mead and Hunt. So yeah, I think the consensus would be good. But the main thing is that, you know, it is $328,000 is what we're talking about in grant funding, as well as I think it was a $82,000 match for the town, which is good. It's going to be exceeded.
Okay. Councilwoman Bryant Ward.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councilwoman Bryant Ward. Mr. Manuel, why do you think that it's going to exceed the $82,000 that's budgeted for the project? And if you think it's going to be more, do you have a rough estimate about how much more?
Yeah, I think, like I said, I think I did the math and it was about $23,000 more. And I'm not sure if the estimate included a contingency, but the contingency is $22,000, which would basically leave a $1,000 difference in the original cost estimate, I think, that we had compared to the new estimate. I don't know if that answers your question, Councilwoman.
So are you anticipating that it'll be about $104,000 that we would be outlaying versus the 82?
Yeah. You'll bear with me. Let me just check my numbers real quick. Yeah, initially it was anticipated to be $410,000. If you take the grant award plus the town's match at 20%, 410,000, and the estimate that we have is for 432,000.
Okay.
And as I said, that's with a $21,000 contingency factored in.
Is that good, Councilwoman Bryant Ward?
Yeah, kind of. What I don't want to do is, bless this and it was going to come back before us, but I don't want to bless it. It comes back before us and it exceeds 200,000 or 150,000. 104. I'm comfortable, going above, but I just want to know if you could get closer to what we would be looking at. But thank you.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to make you aware that, sort of contextualize everything, that this is one item, but you will also be getting the professional services agreement with the contractor being Mead and Hunt as a separate item. So I didn't want to sort of bait and switch you, if you will, on this matter.
Wonderful. Thank you. Councilman Jenkins?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Again, Council Member Jenkins. Thank you for bringing this forward again. I think this is a terrific project. It says in the grant on the first page the $410,000. So now it could be 432. And is that the cost just for is that the design and construction, or is it? I'm not sure I understand the total cost here.
I believe that's
design plus construction.
Yeah. You can probably scroll down. I'm not sure. If I remember correctly, it was for design, and I forget the first part of your question. I apologize.
So the 410,000, is that
Yes.
just for the design of the project, or is it
Yeah, I believe
design plus construction?
It's design, I believe. Pretty sure it's only design only, because the 30s, yeah. But that's why I was trying to read through the agreement. And I think there's also a provision that if our costs, I would have to go back and check the grant itself, but I think there's final design. There's a provision where if we anticipate more expenditures, that we can ask for additional grant fundings to cover those costs. So that would could be reduced. The 23,000, for example, could be reduced further. We would work with our consultant to try to do that.
That's a big number to design a 2.2. Wow. I mean, I'm just surprised it's that much money. And then, so do we have any estimate yet of what it would cost to construct it and how long that would take?
I'm sure once we have the full design done, it would, we would be able to get an estimate from that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think we would be planning to utilize the same funding source, which would be the 80-20.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Goldsmith?
Yes, Councilman Goldsmith, Ward 1. Anytime you can get a 20% investment and get 80% return on your investment, that's always good. I like to look at those figures. Although Councilman Jenkins just raised a question, this is strictly for the design. How much is it going to cost to build it? And are we still going to be at the 20/80 type thing, even for construction funds? Or is the whole construction going to be on us?
No, we anticipate going back out and trying to get the construction also covered under the 80-20 grant funding.
You use that word trying. That doesn't guarantee much. So is that pretty solid that it will happen that way?
In my experience, if they're going to pay 320, then they are also committed to, typically, if you get the design, then yes, you will also get the construction side as well.
Okay.
But there's no guarantees, Councilman Goldsmith.
I like guarantees.
Yeah, I do too.
All right, thank you.
All right, Councilman Trollinger.
Thank you, Councilman Trollinger. Mr. Manuel, where does this, and you may not know, where does this plan to exit onto Route 6? Like what part of Route 6? Do we know yet?
It would be in the area, I guess, of La Plata Road. It would, and then it would be east into town. I know that we looked at the bridge sort of as you come up right before Heritage Green, the entrance into Heritage Green. So I know it includes work done on the opposite side of the entrance to Heritage Green, which you may see some silk fence and thing already down in that area that we've worked with the developer on sort of making modifications in that area around, because the town has a stormwater management pond across the street on Route 6 there.
Okay, yeah, I know I'm somewhat familiar with the program with the state, but I think, you know, I echo the concerns from other council members that this is a big investment for a small town. Of course, we're grateful that we're not going to shoulder the majority of it, but we'd like to know when putting this out there that we're going to have a good chance of success, because, you know, my goodness, that's a big chunk. Even though we've been blessed with the opportunity to use some funds for the betterment of our citizens, there are a lot of needs. So I think we'd like to probably get a little bit more details, you know, as to our chance of success, but that's all I'll say about that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I can bring this back to you. Hopefully I have time to get something more concrete, and I apologize because it's not the most flowing presentation. This is sort of a last minute type item. But I definitely do want to make sure you guys have all the information you want before you render a decision. So I will bring something back to you next month or next week probably, and incorporate in the meet and hunt and sort of tie everything together so that you feel more comfortable with rendering a decision.
All right, Councilman Jenkins.
Thank you, Councilmember Jenkins again. I'm sorry to I guess to add on to what Councilmember Tronzer asked. Is it my understanding that the project would link up or tie into the existing, for want of a better word, the pedestrian pathway that's currently in place along Radio Station Road, and then where it hits Maryland 488 in front of Agricopia?
Yes.
And then it would go down in front of the Sage Point and then tie into the existing sidewalk on the north side of Maryland 6 Charles Street?
It's my understanding, and try to use some maybe specific bike lane depending on the width.
Okay. All right.
I know that was one of the things when they were restriping, we looked at opportunities to sort of maximize the pavement width through there, and whether it's narrowing lanes to try to make more room for our future.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, so Mr. Manuel, we're not going to need a consensus since you're going to bring us information
Yes.
next week, and we will just look for that, and hopefully all of our questions and concerns will be addressed. Wonderful. Thank you for that. Thank you for the answering our questions the best to your ability. All right, we're on legislation, Resolution 21-25 and Resolution 21-26 for introduction.
Yes, Madam Mayor, and just to give you a brief reason why this is back before you, as it's been before you prior. The code has a provision, actually it's the charter, which states that any regular or special meeting of the council held not less than 6 nor more than 60 days after the meeting which the ordinance was introduced. I won't bore you with the rest, but this was introduced and it would not get to you for action before the 60-day time clock, shot clock, if you will, expired. So we are having to reintroduce this legislation tonight for that purpose. So it will be back. I believe there's a public hearing maybe at prior to the business meeting later this month.
All right, Council, any questions on that? All right, excellent. Moving down to our next item, which is matters of information.
I don't have anything for now other than the fact that, you know, with ARPA money and sort of them making that late change in the final ruling, we are still trying to, I guess, investigate or evaluate the best path forward for the town. So, you know, I said Kevin and I will be having discussions on that, and we will talk about that further in the future.
Great. And the only matter of information that I have is that tomorrow is opening day for legislation. I know Councilman Jenkins and I serve on the Maryland Municipal League Legislative Committee, and I serve on MML's Board of Directors and their Executive Board as well. Matter of information for our Executive Board, we are now going to be in a search for a new executive. Scott Hancock, after I think it was either 24 or 26 years, has decided it's time. So November 1st, a new person, after we do a nationwide search for a new executive director of the MML, he will be relaxing and doing what he does best, a little bit of fishing. So that's what I have for matters of information. A lot of our information, a lot of our meetings now are virtual due to a surge in COVID, and they anticipate, I don't know why, but February 14th, we might be back in person up there on the hill. So we'll see what happens. And that's all I have for matters of information. Future work session topics?
Yes, Madam Mayor, you'll see listed on your agenda the police reform update, also the organizational assessment study, and the classification and compensation study. We're hopeful to have, we will definitely have the police reform update, and we're hopeful to have something for you, presentation on the latter two items next week.
Wonderful, thank you. Brings us to unfinished business. We have two reasons to go into closed session this evening. Do I have a motion to read exactly what's up there to make a motion to go into closed session?
Madam Mayor, this is Councilmember Jenkins. I make a motion that we recess and go into closed session according to provisions of Article 3-305, Section 3-305B, 3 and 7 for the purposes of acquisition of real property or for public purpose and matters and directly related thereto.
And
then also consult with legal counsel regarding a legal matter, developer rights and responsibilities agreement process.
all right, so I have a motion to go into closed session for acquisition of property for municipal facilities or infrastructure and town improvements and economic development, as well as developers' right and responsibility agreement process. Do I have a second?
Councilman Goldsmith, second.
All right, thank you, Councilman Goldsmith. Do I have any discussion? All right, all in favor, please indicate by saying aye when I do the roll call. If not, please say nay. Councilman Goldsmith?
Aye.
Councilman Trollinger?
Aye.
Councilwoman Bryant Ward?
Aye.
Councilman Jenkins?
Aye.
And Mayor James is an aye as well. Thank you very much for that. And this brings us to our next session, which is the public comment participation portion of the agenda. Since this is a new year, I would like to take the opportunity to explain this agenda item. Per resolution 21-23, which was adopted August 24th, 2021, and Town Code chapters 13-10 to 13-15, public comment is set aside for those citizens who wish to address the town for less than 3 minutes each. Citizens need not give prior notice to the town to speak during the public comment participation portion of the agenda. Public comment participation shall be for the purpose of allowing members of the public to address any town business. However, public comment participation is not intended to serve as a forum for debate with the council. All remarks shall be addressed to the council as a body and not to any members thereof. No person other than the council and the person having the floor shall be permitted to enter into any discussion either directly or through a member of the council without the permission of the presiding officer. No question shall be asked to a councilman except through the presiding officer. Lastly, any person making personnel impertinent or slanderous remarks, or who shall become boisterous while addressing the council, shall be forthwith by the presiding officer barred from further audience before the council unless permission to continue is granted by a majority vote of the council. That verbiage that I just quoted was from not only the code, but from our resolution. So that can be found on our website. With that said, is there anyone who would like to speak this evening? And I ask that you state your name, address, and whether you are located within the incorporated town limits. Would anybody like to speak tonight? All right, hearing none. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Councilman Goldsmith, make a motion to adjourn, please.
Do I have a second?
Councilman Jenkins, I would second the motion.
All right, all in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Meeting adjourned. Please, council, pop over to our closed session, and you should have the link. If not, give us a holler. Have a great evening. Good meeting, guys, and it was less than 1 hour.